So what we've been doing is going through the fifth way fundamentals, the rudiments. Yeah, the rudiments of our well, I was going to say the rudiments of our faith, but that's a matter of opinion, whether these are the rudiments. But they are the rudiments of looking at Jesus from a first century Hebrew point of view. And that is the key to being able to unlock what Jesus really meant by what is preserved for us in the Gospels, in the New Testament. And so that's what we've been doing. And I guess it was 2 weeks ago now already, we were talking about legacy building and what legacies meant, where meaning actually comes from in life. And it seemed to me that we needed to spend more time on that because that is such a huge concept. There's so much there, and there's so much that we can say that we agree with intellectually. Cognitively, we can bob our heads up and down and say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But what really happens is that what's really down deep in us, in the unconscious, is so prevalent, it's so all-inclusive, that we will find ourselves moving back into old patterns if we aren't continuing to come back and come back. And so I wanted to do that this morning. Let's hit this again and hit it from a little bit different angle and see what we can come up with. So if you really analyze Jesus' teaching, as we have done so many times, you find out that Jesus is constantly questioning us. He never lets us rest on our laurels. He never lets us just sit with old thinking and old ideas. He's always bringing us forward. And just as Jesus is completely questioning us and relentlessly questioning us, the fifth way, if we actually enter the fifth way, which is Jesus' way, the only way to the Father, we find that that way itself is questioning us to the core. It's funny because Jesus seems so nice, doesn't he? But we have no idea what we're signing up for if we're going to try to be a follower of Jesus. We have no idea how deep the rabbit hole goes because he is going to be taking us right to the edge of everything that we think we know. That's his job. Because he knows that until the entire world as we see it is turned upside down and inside out, we're never going to be able to see what Jesus is really showing us. Now, we can progress incrementally, of course, and we don't get it all at once, of course. It's going to come off in layers, as we said. It's going to be an oscillation, a forward and a backward movement. And as we've talked about so many times in here before, it's really 51%, not perfection, 51%. If we can get over that point and become characterized by these principles, then everything starts to change. And as we are progressing, as we are allowing ourselves to be questioned, allowing ourselves to be moved off of whatever pedestal that we placed ourselves, there comes a point, if we will allow, where we let go of the resistance to these new concepts, these new ideas, these new ways of living. And once we let go of the resistance, then it's possible for us to have an apostrophe, otherwise known as an epiphany. I like that. It's amazing what can happen. Once we stop actively resisting, then stuff has a chance to just kind of blossom. I remember years and years, this is, another lifetime ago, we built a recording studio. This was our own recording studio, and my partner was an audio genius, and so he knew all about wiring and all this, and so he was teaching me. And as we were building out the board, we had to build a patch bay, which is just a board that had probably 144 just audio jacks in it. And all that had to be wired from the back. You know, all the 3 wires of each audio lead. The red one had to go to this terminal, the white one went to this terminal, the black one went to this terminal. And so he gave me the scut work to do. So I was just trying to wire all this stuff. And then after that was done, then all the leads, actually the cables, the patch cables, they had to all be wired up so that we could make this thing go. And I was just following. It was like paint by numbers for me. I knew where the red one and the white one and the black one went, but I didn't really understand what this wiring was all about. What was it really doing? And it's kind of amazing. As I was soldering, all of a sudden, there it was. I finally got it. I understood how the wiring actually worked and how it carried the signal and the ground and the this and that. It was amazing to me how it just kind of opened up like a blossoming flower or something. And when I started trying to follow Jesus along these lines, as I've told you sometimes before, it was about 10 years of really banging my head against the wall where I was doing the wiring, but I didn't understand it. It really hadn't settled in me in a way that made sense. And about 10 years in, sitting on that back deck, suddenly there it was, just kind of popping into a whole new way of understanding, this deeper understanding. And that didn't even change me overnight, but it's been changing me ever since. This is kind of the process. We decide cognitively that we want to follow Jesus. And so we follow the wiring. We do what he tells us to do. We follow the suggestions. And if at some point we can let go of the resistance to this newness, which is letting go of the fear that drives us to resist, then something happens. And we can't control it. You can't say when it's going to happen. You can't manufacture it's happening. But it will happen. And this takes time. It takes years. I've watched people as a pastor and a teacher struggle for years with these concepts. And often they say, I get it, I understand, I agree. I see their heads go up and down. But in the next breath, in the next sentence, they're back to the old way of thinking. They're back to the old way of processing. We all do it. It's just part of the process. But understanding how the process works, that we're not just going to read something, understand it, and then be transformed by it. It is this process of doing and doing and doing until it gets to a different place in our lives. Jesus is going to challenge us. This way is going to challenge the deepest notions of what we think meaning is all about in our lives, what we think purpose is all about, what we think our identity is. Whatever we think about those three things, meaning, purpose, and identity, is going to be challenged to the core. Because anything we think about is not what it really is. Just by the act of thinking about it, putting a picture in my mind, putting a word to it, has already changed it. These deepest things, these spiritual things, can only be experienced. And Jesus understands this. And he's trying to get us to experience the same thing. It's even going to challenge our notion of success in life. What is success in life? What is your definition of that? What do you look at as being successful in life? What's that mean to you? That's going to be challenged as well. Why are we even here as human beings? That's going to be challenged. Nothing is going to be left unscathed. And so this is what Jesus is trying to get us to move toward. The willingness to completely change, rewire our worldview about what we mean when we talk about meaning, purpose, identity, or success in life. It's getting to be a rather old movie, I think, maybe at least 10 years old or 12 or something like that. Do you remember the movie Whiplash? Nobody remembers the movie. Well, a couple of you remember them. Okay, Whiplash. It wasn't a major blockbuster hit, but it was a very, very interesting movie if you ever saw it. And the story is about a young drummer who is just obsessed with wanting to be the greatest drummer in the world and be a legend and an icon and leave this musical legacy the way that Charlie Parker did. And if you don't know who Charlie Parker is, he was an alto saxophonist, came up in the 40s, actually the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and redefined jazz. And he was relentless in how much he would practice and his just his expertise and virtuosity and the way that he redefined how jazz was played. And so that was kind of his idol. He wants to be absolutely great, and he has his priorities and his purpose all absolutely set in life in order to be able to achieve what this is all about. And as I was watching this movie, it really took me back to my days in college in the jazz band, and how so many of this worldview, these thoughts, this way of approaching music and life was prevalent, with all we ambitious musicians that wanted to be great, wanted to be the next Charlie Parker or whatever it happened to be. And I remember that. I remember how that just drove us to try to do this and that. We were a school that hosted a jazz festival every single year. And so every year there would be a headliner that would come in and play with us. And since we were the home band, we got to play with whoever the celebrity musician who came in. And one year Louis Bellson came in. I don't know if you know that name. Probably none of you do. A couple of you do. He was married to Pearl Bailey. And she's probably someone you know more than Louis Bellson. But Louis Bellson was one of the premier drummers in jazz. Absolute artist. Monster player. And so we got to play with him. Well, it's different if you're playing and backing up a sax player or a horn player, but the drummer is the integral part of the band. We had one song that we played that was kicked in real fast, and our conductor knew that if he kicked it in at the actual tempo it was supposed to be, we would slow down until it was way out of the pocket. So he had learned to kick it in faster for us so that when we slowed down, we'd slow down into the pocket. Now we got Louis Belson sitting at the kit, and he kicks it in at that faster tempo, and I tell you, within 8 bars, the whole thing just fell apart completely because Belson was a machine. He started playing, and you just felt it lock in. It did not move. It did not budge. We couldn't keep up with it. The conductor just burst out laughing, realizing what he did, and then kicked it in at the right tempo. But when you feel greatness like that, you feel someone who has gotten to that level, it makes a difference. You can feel that. You can feel the greatness. And yet, who of you remembers his name? All those hours, all those performances, all those accolades as a drummer. And yet, here in this room, who remembers his name? Now, Andrew, the young man who wants to be the great drummer in the movie Whiplash, is completely focused. He's obsessed with greatness. I want to read you a little bit of the script. 2 little scenes, just to give you an idea of exactly where he is. In the first scene, he's sitting with his family at dinner, and Uncle Frank says, "You got any friends, Andy?" "No." "Well, why's that?" "I don't know. I just never really saw the use." "Well, who are you going to play with otherwise?" "Lennon and McCartney, they were school buddies, am I right?" "Charlie Parker didn't know anybody till Joe Jones threw a cymbal at his head." "So that's your idea of success, huh?" I think being the greatest musician of the 20th century is anybody's idea of success. Dying broke and drunk and full of heroin at the age of 34 is not exactly my idea of success. He says, "I'd rather die drunk, broke at 34, and have people at a dinner table talk about me than to live and be rich and sober at 90 and nobody remembered who I was." "Ah, but your friends will remember you. That's the point. None of us were friends with Charlie Parker. That's the point." See where he's coming from? He started dating a girl in the movie, and at one point he has this conversation with her. He says, "Okay, I'm just going to lay it out. This is why I don't think we should be together. I've thought about this a lot. If we're together, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to keep pursuing what I'm pursuing, and it's going to take up more and more of my time. You're going to see me less and less. And when you do, I'll be distracted. I'll be upset. I'll be playing things in my mind. And you're going to just grow to resent me. At a certain point, you'll tell me to ease up on the drumming, to spend more time with you, and I won't be able to. And I'll start to resent you for even asking me that. I'll feel like you're dragging me down, and you'll feel like you don't matter. And before long, we'll hate each other. So I think we should just cut it off now, cleanly, for those reasons, because I want to be great." And she says, "You're not?" "I want to be one of the greats. And I would stop you from doing that?" "Yes." "You know I would stop you from doing that. You know that for a fact." "Yes." "And I would barely see you anyway?" "That's right. And when I did see you, you would treat me like crap because I'm some girl who doesn't know what she wants, and you have a path, and you're going to be great, and I'm going to be forgotten, and therefore you won't be able to give me the time of day because you have bigger things to pursue?" "That's right. That's exactly my point." She says, "You're right. We should not be dating." Wow, huh? Now, do people in real life really speak this way? So directly? So absolutely to the point? Absolutely not. I mean, we don't do that. But some of us are thinking that way. Or at least unconsciously, that material is all there that causes us to act that way without actually saying it so bald-facedly. Now, Fletcher, the sadistic band leader of the top band in the college that he's going to, he's the one who pushes his students relentlessly and abusively to try to be great. He says there are the 2 most harmful words in the English language are "good job." Because he sees when you just tell someone it's a good job, you are just enabling mediocrity. It's a code for mediocrity. And so he is just focused sadistically on pushing his students into greatness. And again, Charlie Parker is his model for doing so. But as the uncle of Andrew pointed out, Charlie Parker's personal life was an absolute mess. He was married 4 times. He was addicted to alcohol and to heroin. He died at 55. And when he died of pneumonia, but he had so trashed his body by then, he had ulcers and he had cirrhosis of the liver. He had all these problems. The doctor who treated him when he died mistook him and mistakenly said that he was probably 55 years old to 60 years old, and he was only 34 at the time. His body was in such a mess. And so, who are our idols? Who are the ones that we are wanting to emulate? What is going on here? What is success? How do we view success? Just simply being the best at something to be remembered for our accomplishments? See, Jesus is trying to challenge our purpose, our sense of purpose, our sense of meaning. What is it that we're here to do? Are we here to make the world a better place? To make it some kind of utopia? That sounds good. Altruistic at least, right? But to do that would require the same concept of greatness. To try to do that on a global scale, well, maybe we can just change it a little bit, change it a small way. Let's ask ourselves a question. Did Jesus make the world better? And our knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, of course he did. Yes, of course he did. But did Jesus really make the world better? Was that his purpose, to make the world better? You know, Matthew 26 is an interesting exchange between him and Judas when Mary Magdalene, actually Mary of Bethany, I think, pours out the alabaster perfume all over his feet and head. Jesus was in the town of Bethany eating at the home of Simon, who had leprosy. A woman came in with a bottle of expensive perfume and poured it on his head. But when his disciples saw this, they became angry and complained, "Why such a waste? We could have sold this perfume for a lot of money and given it to the poor." Jesus knew what they were thinking. And he said, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing for me. You will always have the poor with you, but you won't always have me." So notice what is happening here. Something intensely micro. This act of devotion and love between 2 people is exploded out to the macro world by the disciples and by Judas specifically. This could have been sold and given to the poor. Jesus pulls it right back into the micro. You're always going to have the poor with you, but you're not always going to have me. This is the time for us to react and to interact and to relate to each other on an individual basis. The world will be there, and the world will remain. The poor will always be there can be a metaphor for all of the world systems. All the things that we decry and all the things that we would like to change if we could wave a magic wand. Jesus is saying they will remain. Oh, the church made things better, didn't it? Really? Take a look at church history. See what is really there in the historical record. Did the church really change the worldview of how things are supposed to work? What the church did was mirror it. The church mirrored the Roman Empire, was modeled on it. Well, Jesus was a social revolutionary, wasn't he? Wasn't he breaking all the social norms? And yes, you could say that. Absolutely. But really, if you analyze again what Jesus is doing, the social revolutionary aspects of his life and ministry were the byproducts of what he was doing, not the focus or the purpose of it. Jesus was focused on changing individual lives, focused on changing individual hearts, bringing them back in love with the Father, not the world at large. Now, individuals can make the world better if you get enough of them in any one spot, and that has happened. There's been Camelot moments throughout history. But all in all, the world stays pretty much under the same system. And we can look around right now and say, yes, is anything really any better than it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000, 2,000? The systems continue to move. What Jesus is telling us is that it's up to us to move within the system that we find ourselves, the system within which we are born. Focus on changing that is where Jesus is coming from. And he's focused on the broken. He's focused on the powerless. He's focused on the untalented, Not those who have it all together and trying to lift those up to change things. He's focused on those who don't have it all together. Richard Rohr was kind of brilliant on this. He says the Bible is the most extraordinary book because it repeatedly and invariably legitimizes the people on the bottom and not the people on the top. The rejected son, the barren woman, the sinner, the leper, or the outsider is always the one chosen of God. In every case, we are presented with some form of powerlessness. And from that situation, God creates a new kind of power. This is the constant pattern, hidden in plain sight. There are so many barren women mentioned in the Hebrew Scriptures that you begin to wonder if there was a problem with the water. And even before Moses, God chose a nobody, Abraham, and made him a somebody. God chose Jacob over Esau, even though Esau is the elder and more earnest son, and Jacob is a shifty, even deceitful character. Election has nothing to do with worthiness, but only usability. And in the Bible, usability ironically comes from facing one's own wrongness or littleness, as we see in Mary. God chose Saul to be king out of the tribe of Benjamin, the smallest and weakest tribe in Israel. The pattern does seem to be the last will be first and the first will be last. One of the most dramatic Bible stories in this regard is the story of David. God chose David, the youngest and least experienced son of Jesse, to be king over the nation. Jesse had not even mentioned him as a possibility, but left him out in the fields. In fact, he was a totally forgotten son who then finds his power on a new level. God's bias is toward the little ones, the powerless. And those on the bottom have been rediscovered by those who learn to see deeply with compassion. Francis of Assisi, Teresa of Lisieux, Mother Teresa, and the 12-step spirituality being well-known examples. But even they are usually marginalized by the establishment mind. So here is Jesus, working with, seeking out, lifting up those at the bottom. And so the question is Jesus really biased toward the powerless? Or are the powerless biased toward Jesus? Jesus is an equal opportunity person here. And then who responds is usually those on the bottom. They're the ones who are more changeable. They're the ones who are more amenable. Those are the ones who are willing to hear something different. But either way, Jesus is changing the terms of our idea of purpose, our idea of greatness, our idea of meaning. And it's why we're here. It's not about the macro world. It's about something different. The purpose is not about macro or material things. It's not about changing the world or being the best in it at some specific task. The 4 ways are about this. The 4 ways that we talked about: to yield, to manipulate, or to influence, to exit, or to destroy. Those are the ways that we acquire what we need in the material world. It's the acquisition. But Jesus is trying to turn that inside out and upside down. Jesus is literally rewiring our worldview so that we can see life from the bottom up, from the inside out. Because he knows we as human beings, as physical beings, are going to see and think in macro terms first. That is important for us, essential for us, to build big things, to be spectacular, to be the absolute best in what we do. Why? Because that gives us a sense of power, gives us a sense of control. Take a look at Matthew 7, starting at verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, did not we prophesy in your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name and perform many miracles? Build the big things, do the spectacular things? And then I, God, will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. And as we've talked about before, this idea of knowing in Hebrew is so important for us to understand, because to yada in Hebrew is not to know intellectually, but to know experientially. The root of yada is the word for hand. And so the idea of being able to handle something, to have that intimate experience over a long enough period of time, that's what knowing is all about. It's not cognitive. It is practiced, but not practiced in order to be the best at something objectively. It's just spending time with, letting guard down. Unguarded time spent is what knowing is all about. This is where Jesus is trying to take us. So what he's saying is, knowing is why we're here. Spending enough of that unguarded time to experience what it is to really know someone. That's what constitutes success in God's mind, which is absolutely diametrically opposed to the way we typically measure success. Back in the day when I was being raised a good Catholic child, a poor Catholic child, we had catechism class in our religion class. Some of you may remember this, where we were drilled on the Baltimore Catechism. They'd ask, who is God? And we would all answer in unison. Why are we here? And we would all answer in unison, to glorify God, because that's what it said on the page. Well, what does that mean, to glorify God, if we can even accept that answer at all? Well, we think if we're talking about glorifying God left to our own devices, we're going to think of it as constant praising. We had this idea of heaven being where we go sit on a cloud and we're constantly playing some lute or something and constantly praising God. Is that what glorifying God is all about? Or we think of spectacular works that we can do and accomplishments that we do for God. But when you think about that, those are really just egoic conceptions. It's what the ego wants to do. And apparently God is very unimpressed with those kind of accomplishments. If you think about it, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Have you heard that one before? To glorify God is to reflect God, to reflect God's essence, who God actually is, to become essentially the same as God is glorifying God. Eastern Orthodox Christians have this they call it theosis. Our whole purpose in entering into spiritual formation is to become deified, literally. Theosis means deification. It means not to become God, but to become like God, to have the same essence as God. To become a disciple in the scriptures is the word talmid, or talmidim in the plural. We don't have an analog for what that word means in English. The closest I suppose we could come would be an apprentice who spends his or her life with the journeyman, the master, carpenter or artist, and just spending all their time with them to just become them, to bring into themselves that whole technique and their way of thinking about whatever it is, whatever art or task it happens to be. To actually set aside your own identity and take in the identity of the master for the purposes of being able to be like them, to do what they do. When Jesus comes back from the wilderness, he says, I and the Father are one. He is giving us the expression of what that means, what that looks like, how he experienced becoming so impressed with the essence of the Father that there was no daylight between them anymore. To glorify God, our purpose here is to become indistinguishable from God. And if that sounds too blasphemous for you, then how about to become indistinguishable from God's essence? How God chooses, how God loves, how God operates in relationship. So how in the heck do we do that? How many of you remember Chris Felsen? He's been here several times. Yeah, Chris, great guy. He's been here and played with us, and at some point we're going to have him back. He wrote a blog post a few years ago. And I'm just going to read a couple excerpts from it because I think he's hitting it right on the head. He says, I was raised to be a professional musician, to play all the right notes at the right time. Nothing more, nothing less. Do the job, take the money, and move on to the next gig. Like a coal miner's son, I was born into a trade and a tribe that I would serve through good times and bad for the rest of my days. They'd bury me with my guitar and my union card. After several hundred club gigs, I graduated up into the recording studio brotherhood, and as a professional, I was on time, played my parts proficiently, and I got the job done. I continued to rise through the ranks, and soon I was performing on network television. I had made it. And as much as a guitar player can be, I was a model professional. Now and then in the midst of this professional journey, I would be foolish and play music just for fun. On my own, of course, in a room somewhere private where no one could hear me, and I would fall upon little treasures that I didn't understand or know what to do with. And so I would keep them to myself and then go off onto my next professional gig, keep my head down, do my job. But like a child reading his first Agatha Christie novel, I could not put the book down or stay away from my closet musings with my guitar and these little noodlings or melodies of childlike lyrics, all of which was very unlike the professional I was trained to be. For without realizing it, I was falling in love with music and these simple little musical ideas and chordal shapes. And when I played, I got paid. I got paid even for rehearsals, and those were the days. But being locked in the mind of a professional can be the worst kind of prison. And these prisons, they are full of other joyless criminals who drag one another down into all kinds of sad and small-minded ways. It's a poor way to live. To escape this prison, we must be brave and garner the strength to jump over the barbed wire fences and make a run for it, hoping above all hopes that the keeper of the keys, the union reps, in the high towers do not shoot us in the back and then drag us back to our designated cells. Oftentimes you have to break away from your very own tribe, escape the ghetto as it were, even for a season, only to return when you are fully healed. How did I escape? Well, I somehow allowed the love inside the music to flow through me long enough to wash all the crap out of my stinking thinking. At some point, I forgot that I was a professional and came out of the closet and started to share my little foolish noodlings, melodies, and childlike lyrics with others. And in this love for the single note, the simple melody, that gentle strum of a chord or two that effortlessly carries my folksy lyrics, I learned to be generous with the gift that was first given to me. And how freeing and joyful it has been. I am no longer the professional musician I was trained to be, but the curious child I was born to be. Another affirmation that love never fails. So, is he advocating mediocrity? No, absolutely not, of course. What he's basically saying is that someone can work hard, can strive for excellence, but not get lost in all of that. Because at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later, we start to recognize and even admit to ourselves that the self is not it. The self is not our meaning, purpose, and identity. It's not that. Remember when we read Ecclesiastes? Ecclesiastes was telling us basically that all the tasks that we can perform under the sun in this life are equally meaningless unless through them we engage the task within the task. Well, what's that? I think Chris Felsen is telling us that. He's saying that falling back in love with the task, with the work, with the sensations of it all, with the connection that it affords to us, with everything and everyone who is sharing the moment with us, that's the way back home again. That's the way to find the balance between the two. Because to become the best in something is a process of building up. It's a process of acquiring everything we need. It's a process of placing ourselves in distinction to everyone else and to everything else. And yet falling in love is the exact opposite. It's a letting go. It's a selling everything off. All sense of distinction with the other, all sense of separation. Falling in love is this sense of absolute connection where all the walls have fallen down. What Jesus is telling us is it's the only way to the Father. Only way that we can say that we and the Father are one is if we let go of everything that makes us distinct and come into that kind of connection. Yes, you can do both. You can strive for greatness, strive for excellence, and not lose yourself. Falson did it, but it's very difficult to do because it's a paradox. It's opposing worldviews crashing against each other. It's the camel trying to go through the eye of the needle that Jesus talked about. The rich person is the one who is thinking in this way, has this kind of mindset. To sell that, to let go of that, allows these things to merge. And this balance we're talking about only becomes possible when we, as individuals, begin to value smallness as opposed to the spectacular, to value powerlessness and see that it is not just an absolute abject failure, but it is the way to the greatness that God would recognize. The world will never work this way. The world will never think this way. Don't be waiting for the world to change. We need to change within the system we find ourselves. Jesus is constantly trying to rewrite our values, to rewrite this worldview, and get us to think in this different direction. Look what he says at Matthew 11:11. And when you see two 11s together, those repeating numbers, you're supposed to pay specific attention, right, honey? So, Matthew 11:11. Truly I say to you, among those born of woman, there has not arisen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Wow. What's he saying there? John the Baptist was the greatest in the world at what he was doing. He was the last of the prophets of Israel, right? And he was the greatest of them all. Jesus says, of those born of woman, like Charlie Parker, he was the greatest. Muhammad Ali, he was the greatest, right? He was the greatest born of woman. That should be code for us. Because what he says in John 3, when he's talking to whose name shall not be mentioned, apparently. Nicodemus, thank you. He's talking to Nicodemus, and he says, you know, you were born of water, but you have to be born of spirit. You had a first birth born of water, the amniotic fluid. The born of water is the first baptism. It's the first birth. It's being born of woman physically into this world. John is the greatest of those in this world. But there is a second birth. We must be born again of spirit. And everything changes. And the person who is the least in the kingdom of heaven is the one that is going to be even greater than the greatest who was born in the world. Basically, John is the greatest in the world because he's born of woman and water, and he did everything he was supposed to do. But the least in the kingdom has let go of self, has let go of that distinction, that sense of separation, and become small, and has recognized that smallness can still create and contains everything that God is. John doesn't think that Jesus is the one anymore. From prison, he sends his friends to ask him, are you the one, the expected one, or should we wait for someone else? Because he's not fitting the bill. John is still thinking along the world's lines. He's still thinking with that particular worldview. But the least in the kingdom is seeing things very differently. The least in the kingdom can see God in an impoverished baby lying in a manger. Can see him in the things that we would just pass by without giving a second thought. That is greater than the greatest. If you want to get into orbit, I know I've said this several times, if you want to get into orbit, then the greatest jet, which is the greatest mode of travel across the face of the earth, will not get you there. because it can't achieve escape velocity. If you want to get into orbit, you're going to have to get out of the jet and get into a rocket that can take you where you really want to go. This is what Jesus is trying to do for us. He's trying to get us out of the vehicle that the world has given us and get us into a vehicle that can actually take us where you want to go. Because God's greatest in the world is anyone who realizes that they are nothing except in connection to everything. It's not the self that can be raised up to greatness. It's when we realize our greatness is in losing ourselves in connection with everything that everything starts to change. That oneness, that connection is why we're here. Nothing else will suffice in our lives. No matter where you achieve, no matter what greatness you achieve, in your heart of hearts and in the dark of night, there will be something missing. Nothing else will suffice. Nothing else will scratch the itch of connection except connection itself. And we must overcome the world's need to acquire, to be spectacularly different, if we're ever going to fall back in love and ability to just simply connect. And those who are still striving for greatness will see everything that I'm saying as a cop-out, right? An excuse for not working hard, for not trying to be that great. And that's possible, I suppose. But I want you also to recognize that working hard for that greatness can also be an excuse for not facing the vulnerability of in-loveness. That can be the way that we don't ever have to cede the power that we think we have. We can do both. We can find the balance. We can work for excellence and we can have connection at the same time. But only after we begin to value smallness, value the smallness of self as Jesus did. And what will that look like? Well, I think in large part it's going to look like this one little poem from William Blake. Hope there's some William Blake fans out there. I sought my soul, but my soul I could not see. I sought my God, but my God eluded me. I sought my brother and found all three. That's the way it works. If we're seeking it in its own self, for its own self, it'll always elude us. But once we just sink back into connection, allow all that to leach out of us, then that epiphany happens. You suddenly understand the wiring. If we will let Jesus rewire our worldview, we'll see kingdom wherever we look, in everything. No matter how hard we work, we will still be able to see kingdom in the task at hand, the task within the task. And once we see kingdom as the real source of meaning and purpose in our lives, once we seek it out and seek it first, then all else will be added. Let's pray. Father, this is one of those teachings that is so hard for us because it just flies in the face of everything that we think we know and everything that we see, everything that is reinforced with us every single day. And it feels like a cop-out. It feels like we are moving into mediocrity if we aren't just absolutely obsessed on that thing out there that we have decided will make our lives a success. Without any fading of our dreams, without any taking the blush off the excellence that we want to achieve, help us to also see that that's not the crux of it. That's the icing on the cake, that the connection is everything. And if we can stay connected and realize that we lose ourselves in connection, then we can also pursue the work and not let it take us over. Help us, Lord. This is so difficult, but it's everything. We don't want to fall down to one side or another and become unbalanced in either direction. We want to find that sacred tension in the middle. Help us with that. And initially, Help us to see the value of an unassuming God, of an unassuming self, of allowing ourselves to become smaller, to diminish as you increase. Help us with that first and foremost. That's our first step. And then from there, take us as close as we can to you, your heart, your essence, your character. That's what we desire deeply, Lord. Help us, help ourselves to find you in the midst of everything. And never let us forget we can only love because you loved us first. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's all stand.